Jesus Olivares just hit the heaviest total ever in raw powerlifting, tested or untested, extending his own record a few days ago, representing the newest peak of an over 50-year evolution that began with Don Reinhoudt back in 1973. So today I'm breaking down every powerlifter in history who has held the all-time raw total record, as well as those who have come very close recently, including someone who actually attempted to break it on the exact same day as Jesus. So when I say raw, what I mean is no knee wraps, only knee sleeves. And for the purposes of this video, I don't care if lifters are tested or untested. I'm just looking at the heaviest raw totals, period. So starting off with the strength sport legend Don Reinhoudt, who won the inaugural IPF World Championships in 1973, becoming the first raw lifter to total over 1,000 kilos. This is the only lifter where I won't have video footage of their lifts, all the other ones I will. And yeah, he won the inaugural Worlds with 1034.1 total, weighing just under 160 kilos. He actually won the first 4 IPF World Championships from 1973 through to 1976, and also won World's Strongest Man in 1979. It was actually the year after, in 1974, where he would set the legendary record that would stand for the next 4 decades of 1042.5. You can see all the lifts play out there. Crazy bare knee, 900-pound squat, which probably would have gotten red lights because he took a step back after the rack man, but I guess they did things differently back in the 70s. But yeah, this record, I mean, it stood for that long, partially because of how legendary it was, but also partially because back then, you know, soon after those mid-70s years, the IPF wraps were introduced, which was in a different category. I know wraps back then were very different to wraps today, but still. And then it quickly morphed into equip lifting with single ply gear, and that's a whole category in and of itself. So there pretty much wasn't any, there weren't lifters that were lifting raw to really contend with this record for like decades, right? Not to downplay how impressive he was, because obviously it was way ahead of its time, but that kind of explains why it went unchallenged for so long. But it actually wasn't until literally 40 years later, in 2014, when it was broken by Josh Morris, who hit 1043.2, becoming the first raw lifter to cross into the 2,300 pounds. He was an untested lifter, Josh Morris was, and he was actually only 25 years old at the time he did this, which is quite impressive, weighing over 400 pounds, and his total was somewhat carried by this absolute monster bench press, although he did deadlift over 800 pounds too, as you can see here. But it was on in 2014, so literally 40 years after Don Reinhoudt, 25-year-old Josh Morris broke it. And yeah, Josh, since, or in the years after this, he went on to total in the 1070s, although by the time he did that a few years afterwards, it was already below what the raw record was pushed to since. This was the only time he would hold the record. Then it was broken by Eric Lilliebridge in 2015, 1067.5. Eric Lilliebridge was one of the legends of untested powerlifting back in the day, back in the golden era of untested powerlifting when it was far superior to the IPF side of the sport. Back when I was a fan of it, sort of in those mid to late 20-teens, when I first really got into powerlifting. But yeah, Eric Lilliebridge also well and truly an untested powerlifter, and it was actually a year younger than Josh Morris. He was 24 years old when he did this, which is crazy. And also notably, he was in the 140 kilo weight class. So not only did this make him the youngest ever to hold this record, it also made him the lightest ever and the only non-super heavyweight to do so. He was in the 140 kilo class, weighing in at 138.8. And would actually go on to extend this record the following year in 2016. He added a few extra kilos to it, taking it to 1075 kilos in the high 2,300 pounds. And he did this at the exact same body weight of 138.8 kilos. So again, in the 140 kilo class, this was actually obviously also the 140 kilo raw record, as well as the all-time record. And this stood until Larry Wills broke it about 4 years later on the untested side for the 140 kilo total. Over 900 pound deadlift as well to go alongside that over 900 pound squat he had. Absolute squat demon, Eric was. Huge squat on him. But yeah, this made him the lightest ever to hold this record, and the lightest to this day. And then along comes Ray Williams. Ray Williams, the super heavyweight GOAT before Jesus Olivares came along, first took this record in 2016 at USAPL Raw Nationals. The record returned to the tested side of the sport. Ray was a tested lifter throughout his career and remains one to this day, even though he failed a test and is now suspended. There's a pre-workout ingredient there, don't worry. But yeah, over 1,000 pound squat, 240 kilo bench, and also a very respectable mid 800 pounds pull on him. Yeah, USA Raw NAS 2016. He was already a 3-time world champion at this point, but this was the first time where he took the all-time Raw record, including the untested guys, weighing in at about 180 kilos in body weight. And Ray would go on in the subsequent years to not just continue racking up world titles and world records, but also further extending himself as the strongest Raw lifter ever, regardless of tested or untested, which he would do the next year in 2017 at the Arnold Slingshot Pro, where he squatted this massive 477.5, which was the IPF world record squat for 7 years until Jesus broke it at 2024 Sheffield. This was sanctioned by the NAPF, hence counted as an international, hence counted as IPF world records for that squat and total. But 1105 was significant for a few reasons, because this was the first time anyone had broken into the 1100 kilos, and also the first time anyone had broken into the 2400 pounds. So kilo and pound enthusiasts rejoiced around the world at this. Absolutely huge performance here from Ray. First ever 1100, weighing over 400 pounds. He was 30 years old at the time when he did this, and this was only a few kilos off what would end up being his lifetime best performance, which he hit 2 years later in 2019. Ray kept winning world titles, kept adding world records to his resume, and extended his biggest ever total to 1112.5 in 2019 at another Arnold meet, this time not an international USAPL, rather than an NAPF meet. Hence, this did not count as international world records, but nevertheless, his 490 kilo squat still stands as the heaviest Raw squat ever done, tested or untested, and still stands as the heaviest Raw lift ever done under any IPF affiliate. Absolutely huge squat there. Also hit a PB bench of 247.5, so Ray's subtotal was on fire this day. 190 kilos in body weight, 1112.5, 2,453 pounds. And then he hit this 375 kilo pull to lock up that total. This was his second deadlift, and he actually attempted 397.5 on his third, which would have given him an 1135 total, which would have entered him into the 2,500 pound club at 2502. Unfortunately, he got it to, well, damn near stood up with it, just couldn't quite lock it out. It was quite clearly not locked out, and he got 3 red lights. And this would stand as Ray's best of a total before, unfortunately, he started dipping in the next couple of years. And then the following year in 2020, the record returned to the untested side. This time it was Dan Bell who took it. Similar to Eric Lilliebridge, another untested lifter who predominantly lifted in wraps as opposed to sleeves. However, he did this record in sleeves, and quite famously, this was supposed to be a tune-up meet to a bigger wrap meet he was going to do in a few months' time. But this, as the story goes, he just felt so good on this day, he thought, why not go for it? And go for it he did, and I'm glad he was, because he ended up walking away as the Raw all-time record holder. So quite a fantastic day for him. Over 1,000 pound squat, 900 pound deadlift. He was 33 years old at the time, weighing 380 pounds. And this record stood for the next 3 years until Jesus Olivares at the inaugural Sheffield put up arguably the most impressive performance in powerlifting history. If you had to pick one, you'd be hard-pressed to not pick this one. The inaugural Sheffield, of course, this was back in the tested side, so Jesus returned the record to the tested side of the sport, similar to what Ray had done a few years prior. But yeah, the inaugural Sheffield, Jesus was a wild card for this after a somewhat disappointing 2022 Worlds, even though he won and was not expected to do very well. Not only did he do very well and break the world record, he shattered the world record and won the whole goddamn thing. Walked away as a Sheffield champion. Absolutely huge total. Over 1,000 pound squat, 600 pound bench, 900 pound deadlift. Tested on the strictest of standards. IPF judging, IPF world records. Sheffield, the first one, winning Sheffield. I mean, there's so many things I could say about this, but absolute monster total. And in the years since, Jesus has struggled to beat this and even match this, and he's only done so in his last performance at SBD Austin a few days ago, where he added a kilo to that total with 1153.5, which now stands as the heaviest ever Raw total, tested or untested. Jesus added a kilo to it. Not an official international record, because this was done Powerlifting America level, but nevertheless still the all-time Raw record. 1153.5, absolutely huge. He chipped his best ever squat. He missed his third bench of 275, where he didn't need it because all he needed was to match his 410 kilo deadlift, which was an absolute joke for him. His grip held firm on this, and then he Hail Married a 430 on his third, which he didn't quite get, although he came shockingly close to it. But yeah, this took out the third place at SBD Austin behind Joe Jordan and Bob Matthews, who broke their American records in the weight class, in the respective weight classes by more. Hence, they finished first and second out of Jesus. But still, this is the biggest raw total in powerlifting history. Tested or untested, held by Jesus Olivares. Also, I should mention, Jesus, when he broke the record at 2023 Sheffield, as if that wasn't impressive enough, he was only 24 years old. So Jesus, joined with Eric Lilliebridge, is actually the youngest person to ever do this, which is wild. I mentioned at the start of this video, though, there have been a few other lifters who have taken cracks at this record recently. So look at those now. Kirvay, a month ago in October, actually attempted to break this record at the Abs Series Rumble 2. This was his second squat of 425. On his third squat of 440, he actually tore his quad, had to dump the bar, but still carried on with the meet and still benched his absolutely monstrous 290 kilos with a torn quad. But even more impressively, he deadlifted 410 kilos with a torn quad. This was his second attempt deadlift to lock up an 1125 kilo total, which broke the record in the 140 class. So he was another 140 lifter who was attempting to become the lightest person to ever do this, a few kilos lighter than Eric Lilliebridge. And then he Hail Married his final pull and loaded 440, which is what he needed to hit 1155. But unfortunately, he tore his hamstring due to overcompensating on his torn quad leg. So he did himself quite a bit of damage at this meet. But the fact he even came that close and attempted is wild after what happened in his squats. But yeah, that would have given him 1155, which would have taken the all-time raw record and would have made him the, as I mentioned, the lightest to ever do it, and the second ever non-super heavyweight to do it after Eric Lilliebridge. And like I said, he would have been like 2 kilos lighter than Eric had he got that. Unfortunately, he didn't. Although when he gets back to full strength, I'm sure he'll take another crack at it. And provided his quad/hammies stay intact, I wouldn't be surprised if he managed to do that. Although Jesus is also looking crazy strong with that final 430 deadlift attempt. Then the lifter I mentioned who actually attempted to break this on the same day as Jesus, what are the odds of that, was another untested lifter. Carl Kirvay is also an untested lifter, I should mention. But Andrew Hause, another untested guy, attempted to break it on the exact same day as SBD Austin, 22nd of November at the USPC, the Shack Showdown. Also another 140 lifter and even a few kilos lighter than Carl Kirvay. You can see his lifts there, absolutely huge squat. 468 squat in sleeves at that body weight, sub 300 pounds is ridiculous. And also a 410 deadlift. It seems like 410 is a deadlift to do, given that Jesus, Carl, and Andrew all hit 410 on their second attempt deadlifts. But yeah, sub 300 pounds. 1135, so he actually broke Carl Kirvay's 140 kilo raw record, and then he loaded up 430 kilos, which would have given him 1155, same number Carl was shooting for. And this would have beaten Jesus's record just a few hours after it was set. But unfortunately, it was not to be. Popped out of his hands. That was a grip issue. He got it to just around the knees, but no further. And that was Andrew's attempt. Although, again, similar to Carl, if he comes back again, I wouldn't be surprised if he hits this. And this would have made him the lightest ever to do it. So similar to Carl, he was going for the second ever non-super heavyweight after Eric Lilliebridge. But he was quite a few kilos lighter. Like I said, he's nowhere near foot at the 140s. He weighed in at 132.8, so sub 300 pounds, which is crazy that he came that close. Now, aside from Kyle and Andrew who are close, the other lifter who I think is very close to this and will probably break it very soon, another untested lifter, is Colton Engelbrecht, who, yeah, absolutely crazy. His best total is 1,200 kilos in reps. You can see his best numbers there are in reps, although he has since gone on to deadlift almost 500 kilos in a powerlifting competition under powerlifting rule sets. That is him standing up with 500 kilos a fraction of a second before it popped out of his hands with, it was a grip issue or his hand tearing. And then he came back a few minutes later and pulled it in straps. Insane that he could pull 500 kilos for damn near 2 singles on that day. But the point I'm trying to make there is you can see the lift breakdown of his best lifts where he totaled the 1,200 kilos, which is the all-time rep record to beat Dan Bell's that I mentioned earlier. That came off with a 470 deadlift and 260 bench. We've seen him bench 600 pounds in the gym, and like I said, we've seen him damn near stand up with 500 kilos. So if he competes in sleeves, which I'm pretty sure he's saying in the next competition is in sleeves, he's only going to need to squat like low 400s, and I think he's going to be good to break 1155, courtesy of a bigger bench and bigger deadlift, making up the rest of his total. So I think Colton's definitely going to take this. I've made a bunch of other videos about Colton Engelbrecht. I'll leave those linked there if you want a more detailed breakdown of how insane his lifts are and the records he's broken. So check those out if you want. But yeah, that is the history of the 6 lifters who have held the raw powerlifting record, the all-time heaviest total raw in the history of the sport, and also the 2 to 3 lifters who have attempted it and are coming very close and or will attempt it soon. So let me know what you think. Who's going to be the next guy to break this record?